I'm normally the invisible voice inside your head. Stuff like that happens sometimes, though, on this show. We are here today, doing the thing we always do, talking about the art and business of making games. Normally, I'm invisible. You can't see me because I'm playing games, but because we're here to do some GDC talk today, some esports talk, I decided it would be better. Our time would be better spent having a nice, productive conversation as opposed to getting owned in League of Legends. Because that's what I do when I boot up League of Legends these days. So I am joined. I am, for once, I'm the tiny head here in the corner. But above me is a giant head. That giant's head name is Marty. Marty, would you please introduce yourself and who you are and what you do?
If you don't know who I am, I don't know why I'm here then, because I'm like uber famous and stuff. So.
I may have made a mistake.
You've offended the gods, right?
Offended the guest.
No, I kid. So my name's Marty. I'm often better known as Laser Chicken. No, I'm not the guy who won BlizzCon, though I like it when people mistake me as him because it implies that I was actually good at video games at some point.
Yeah.
But I'm one of the co-founders of Splyce. If you're unfamiliar with us, then you probably don't watch a lot of top-tier esports.
Yeah.
We're in the European LCS. We're in Call of Duty World League. We just won a Halo championship this weekend, actually.
Congratulations.
Thank you. StarCraft, Counter-Strike, Rocket League, Smite. We just launched recently. About 8 titles we're in right now.
Nice. I am here today. I have brought you here today, Marty, because I hear you're giving a talk at GDC this year, right?
Where did you hear such information?
I went to
scheduled.gdcconf.com
and saw your name. Also, you emailed me demanding to be on this show.
I did. I'm very, very demanding.
Yeah.
So.
Actually, if you really want to know more about Marty's talk before we go in and talk about it ourselves, I'm just going to point out that if you scroll down the page, there's a big old button where it says "See Marty's talk at GDC." Click on that, and you'll get more information right off the bat. But Marty, if someone here in the audience was attending GDC, how would you pitch your talk to them? Why should they come?
Yeah, so what we decided to go this year, it's actually not going to be myself solo. I'm actually doing it with Todd Mary, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of Delaware North. And for those that don't know, Delaware North is a minority investor in Splyce, and they happen to own the Boston Bruins and the TD Garden. And so we've been working together for now over a year and a half, and we're going to talk about what it's like taking a traditional sports organization and working with an esports team and all the good, the bad, and the ugly that comes along with that. And a lot what we've learned basically along the way in trying to operate together.
Right on. I am going to point out that I unfortunately am not a Bruins fan, but I do have an appreciation for certain Boston sports teams. To get things started, I'm just kind of curious, could you open up, we don't want to spoil the whole talk because we're going to leave some meat for you to handle at GDC, but could you roughly explain the history of Splyce and what it has to do with this partnership with the Boston Bruins and your minority owner?
Sure. So we, interestingly, are, I guess, the proof that these days you can start a business almost anywhere. We're from Western New York, which is Rochester, it's called, and it is not a big city. It is not a tech hub or any of those kind of things, but it is a great city with some awesome, smart people, and we were able to put together a really good group of folks and start a business from a small town, and that's kind of the nature of the internet these days. We've been in existence for about 3 years, and as we were growing very much bootstrap-like and taking on some small friends and family and angel money, unlike it wasn't large VC money like a lot of our competitors. We ended up actually getting introduced to Delaware North because they're basically in our backyard. So they're based out of Buffalo, New York, which is about an hour away. And what we found is that we had a lot of similar ideas about the industry and moving forward, and we had a really great champion over there in Todd Mary, who I've mentioned, who is a Dota nut. And if you see any references to when are we going to get a Dota team, it's almost always him saying it. He's been asking for a year and a half now, and I almost want to not get one just to troll him, but unfortunately business decisions are not made that way, at least not good ones. So
I just want to point out, so this guy who works for a large company that ostensibly doesn't have to do anything in video games decided to put a little bit of money into esports, and he did this because he loves Dota, and you still haven't given him a Dota team.
I know, and I'll do AMAs on Reddit, and always I see a random question that says, when is Splyce getting into Dota? I look at the name, and it's from him. So But yeah, no, it is very much a Delaware North saw both opportunity because of their sports operation, and this is sports at the end of the day, and because of their resources kind of globally being a hospitality company that works in a number of arenas and sports stadiums around North America and the UK.
Right on. So Splyce, tell me about like how you decided to. I think a lot of people like look at esports and say, "I want to do that," but what they're usually looking at is sort of the athlete end of the business, and they sort of see they're like, "Oh, I'm good at this game. Maybe I have a chance to be an athlete." But what made you want to get into the team ownership side and all the travails that come with that end?
So I have an interesting background because I come from entertainment. So I spent 10 years in theater, film, and television. I worked in New York City. I traveled abroad, did a lot of off-Broadway work. So this is not a new area for me in a lot of ways. Talent management, production management's always been kind of what I've done. I actually have a theater degree undergrad. We actually, a funny story, started out as a tech company 3.5 years ago. We created this little website called followesports.com, and we thought we were going to be the TV guide of esports. And turns out it's really hard to grow a website these days and make money at doing it. And we picked up a team as a marketing effort originally. We thought we'd grow it in the same way Kingwin famously has the Kingwin Counter-Strike team. And so we had the Follow Esports Counter-Strike team. That's actually what we picked up. It was our very first team. And not only did we realize that we might be onto something with picking up a team, but it was like very sometimes it's right place, right time, right? And we were picking up teams in that fall right before Immortals, Echo Fox, NRG, like the big Influx Vitality got their big fundraise, and the big EULCS and NALCS sales happened, and that allowed us to kind of ride the momentum even though we didn't have tens of millions of dollars. And for me personally, I guess the whole thing that's really driven me is I love working with players. I love working with talent. It's what made me be a stage manager and a production manager when I was in theater. I love working with people who are the best at what they do, and I get to watch them go do this spectacular thing, whether it's act in a play, dance in a show, or go play in a game, and all those things get that same kind of excitement for me as an owner or manager.
Right on. What was the biggest surprise you learned as you picked up teams in multiple games and essentially making Splyce not just like one team for one game, like the way the Lakers might be for basketball, but now Splyce, there are multiple Splyce teams playing different games?
I guess it's hard to say there was one biggest surprise. I guess if I had to pick one, it was definitely harder than I thought to share resources across, especially as we got regionality involved, because we decided to get involved with a second region in Europe by going into the LCS and Call of Duty out there. And I still love that we have this Atlantic Ocean doesn't exist for a lot of us in Western esports, which we personally believe in, and we have a lot of fans in both regions. But it is challenging having good people you can trust when they're an entire ocean away. Is hard. Signing talent who famously, I didn't meet our Call of Duty team until I think it was 8 months after they've been playing for us. And at that point, we were already, I think, the second best Call of Duty team in Europe, and had yet to even meet them in person. And that's the nature of that kind of multi-game, number one, because you can't go to every event, but number two, starting to get regionalized to where not everyone's going to be near you. So
would you say your job has actually weirdly become it's so, like we spend a lot of time talking on the stream about like either game sales, either in-game sales, but I think it's interesting that your job is weirdly kind of a people person job. Like you spend a lot of time, your role seems to directly involve working hands-on with individuals explicitly about what they do, as opposed to man, I don't know if this makes any sense, but like is that accurate? Like your job is sort of like directly interfacing with people and making sure they can do their jobs well?
Yeah, I actually, I heard a saying once someone said about what a CEO's job is, and I fully agree with it. It's number one, to raise money, number two, to make money, number three, to create workplace culture, and number four, to hire amazing people. And I think that workplace culture and hiring amazing people kind of cross over. You first hire them, and then you want to grow them in that workplace culture. It's a little different in a sports team or an esports team, because it isn't just the people in your office, it's also the players who are out and about and in the public eye. And I personally, like, one of the things that really matters to me is having that close personal connection to the players. I think that we've a big part of what's made us successful is when a player goes to re-sign and they're looking at all their options, we it tends to be a big plus that they're with us. It's not like oh well, I guess I'll stick with Splyce because that's the only choice I had. And I think we attribute at least some part of that to the way we've built relationships with them, whether it's not just myself, but the team management guys, the folks in social media, the folks who handling the sponsorship deliverables. Like, we really try to maintain an open communication with the players and not treat them as meat, I guess is the best way to put it. And not that there's a ton of people out there doing that, but there always are in any sports or entertainment industry, right?
Yeah. I think like it's this is actually a lot of discussion in normal sports, is how players are sort of expected to not be anything other than machines to move the ball around. If you think about the NFL right now, and this conversation about protests is the most polite way I can put it.
Or LeBron James right now being told he should just dribble a basketball, right?
Yeah.
So.
And now I guess. Well, I'm curious. How do you? I guess those are very dramatic examples, and they're in much more larger, public-facing traditional sports. What challenge do you have to overcome in managing an esports team to make sure you're not doing that to your players? What's the esports version of that you're trying to avoid at all times?
I mean, I don't know that we've yet had like something so dramatic as you said. We do have definitely topics that come up where people get involved, and I mean, a big part of, I guess I would say, our job is to educate our players so that they are realize the impact they have when they say things, for good or for bad. Help them learn to use their voice in a positive manner when possible, and also to empower them that we've got their back. So sometimes when they might feel like they need to go to social media to complain about something, right? Yeah. I would say a few years ago that was a much more prevalent issue for us, whereas we spent time really getting our players to understand we're there so that we can be the ones to go out proactively and try and solve problems for them, so that it doesn't become a negative vibe, right? It becomes a supportive, constructive, we're trying to grow this scene together. Right. I would say, though, that we're pretty supportive of our players having their own personalities in a lot of ways. One I can think of off the top of my head is Mad Cat from our Call of Duty team. We won the Stage 1 championship in 2017 in Call of Duty, and Mad Cat got on stage, and one thing he talked about, which became a very big deal, was how he felt like there weren't enough people really taking this seriously in his region, and this was proof that if you put your nose to the grindstone and really worked on it and got your reps in, they could compete with North America and win championships. And that's I said, like I said, it was a controversial opinion at the time. It got a lot of conversation going, but I'm glad to have him care so passionately about something like that he wants to talk about that. And it was a positive interaction with the community. It wasn't a negative one. So I'd say that there is definitely a delicate balance. We can always do more. We're not perfect at anything, but I'd say that I think we're doing a pretty good job at starting to support our athletes in that way.
Right on. Aspet from chat asks a question. They are saying, obviously during the events you are enemies, I'd say opponents with the other teams, but how does the esports community work behind the scenes? Do you also work together with other teams to make sure the whole picture is the best, or are you focusing on your own team and your own company?
It's a great question. I often say that I think teams are actually too nice to each other when they're on the field. Hey, here's our buddies over here and our buddies over there. Like, I'm sorry, I don't think Jerry Jones is buddying with anybody else in the NFL during when their teams are playing. Like, oh, tough loss, guys. And no, it's like, we kicked your ass, right? And I think that's really a fun part for fans, is that real dedication to we're super hyper competitive on the field, but yes, behind the scenes we are all very, very communicative and close, especially among the ownership groups. We know that the only way we're going to grow this industry is together. It tends, because we don't all have the same titles, it gets a lot of times within certain titles. So I have my group that I work with within League of Legends, and a different group within Counter-Strike, and a different group within Smite, and a different group within StarCraft, etc., where we are talking to the different owners and figuring out what can we do together. We are talking to the publishers. We're even talking to other players in a way that's to build good relationships. Like, I have good relationships with a lot of Call of Duty players in North America. We've never had a North American Call of Duty team, but they're an integral part of what's growing this sport, is our opposition. That UK versus North America rivalry is a huge part of what will make Call of Duty successful. So we do put a lot of time into thinking about not only how can we, from the business side, grow opportunities together, but also how can we make better storylines for fans. And we don't do a ton of it, but we've done some cool stuff over the years where we've said, hey, what if we did something together and help to make it more interesting for fans?
I'm going to shift back towards the subject of the talk a little, which has to do with, as we talked about at the top of the hour, mixing the business of esports with the business of traditional sports. Traditional sports are not separate from what we mentioned before, an uncontroversial business. There is like stadium ownership. Stadium ownership is a big deal. Like how sports teams impact local communities. I think to me, what's interesting about esports is up until very recently, a lot of teams were not extremely affiliated with local geographies, and they were sort of removed from some of these questions about like how do your fans behave? What benefits are you bringing to a city? What have been as sort of Splyce has now become like merged with a local property. How have you begun to realize how have some of these challenges affected your work, and what do you think other esports owners should be on the lookout for?
So the regional aspect is really interesting because I do truly believe that a big part of fandom is a personal connection. It isn't just the online connection. Mm-hmm. Some of our biggest and most hardcore fans are people who I've met face-to-face, or they've met our players face-to-face, or one of our staff members, and they've built that kind of visceral connection between them and the brand. Mm-hmm. And that, by the way, transcends game, where they'll watch a new title they may have never played, never had interest in, because we're in it, because they have that level of depth of connection. Mm-hmm. Regional helps provide that in a lot of ways, because you have an attachment to a community in the same way that if you're from Boston and you like hockey, there's a good chance you're going to become a Bruins fan, right? Or even the regional New England area. Mm-hmm. We do believe that in esports, we meaning Splyce, I don't mean to speak for anybody much broader than that there is opportunity broader than a single city, because we're not confined to a single city. Mm-hmm. Or a single stadium. We don't have to go, that's our stadium in that city. And so at Splyce, one of the things we've said is we're much more of a Northeast team, Northeast North America. And we want to be able to reach consumers in Ontario and Toronto and over in Detroit and in Pennsylvania and up in the New England area, because mm-hmm. we think that that's a large, well-connected area that we can do that in. And then in Europe, the UK is obviously important to us because of Call of Duty and because of the English language and things like that. So that's how we think of it. We think of it as opportunity rather than an issue. Mm-hmm. I think you're definitely going to see more a conversation coming up about it, obviously with Overwatch happening. You've definitely seen people say, hey, I guess that's my team because that's my area. Like, the affiliation works in a lot of ways. And you're also seeing people who want to come out to these viewing parties or hang out and do activities together because it's something local and regional to their DNA, if you will. Mm-hmm. I think my favorite example as a traditional sports fan, I grew up a massive sports fan. I'm a San Antonio Spurs fan. I've been a fan since I was like 8 years old. I have never had an affiliation to another team. And then I moved to New York City. And being in New York City, and Madison Square Garden is there, and the Knicks are so iconic. Before long, I found myself also a Knicks fan. Mm-hmm. And it's like there is something about being surrounded by other fans who also root together, that community that's created. I mean, it goes back to our nature as human beings, right, to want to be part of community. So mm-hmm. I think it's a huge opportunity. I think that when harnessed correctly, it's going to do a lot of really cool stuff. It's going to create a lot of questions where how do we maintain the globalness while getting local? Brands like the Yankees and Lakers do that really well, obviously, Manchester United and others. But esports wants to maintain that globalness while grabbing the local opportunity as well.
Right on. My next question has to do with a couple years ago. I remember there was a dust-up in how Riot Games was relating to its League of Legends players, which had to do with a lot of teams were starting to feel that with certain rules coming down the pipeline, it was harder and harder for them to make revenue. And there was talk of players' unions. There was talk of independent league organizations. I think where in my head this made me think about is the fact that esports does not monetize the same way normal sports does. In part because the people who make the games behind esports are not monetized. They're trying to make money off game sales and game revenue, not necessarily the same licensing deals that the NFL or the NBA are focused on. How has that difference affected your line of work and your relationship with Delaware North? And do you think either the way esports makes money will affect traditional sports, or do you think the way traditional sports makes money will affect esports business?
The short answer is both. I really think that we're learning from each other in a lot of ways. I never forget being at Facebook a couple of years ago, and they had their very first kind of kickoff into esports. And the guy at the time who was running sports for them, he used to work, I think he was the commissioner of the D-League for like 10 years in the NBA. He said, hey, you guys may not realize it, but you guys are ahead of sports in understanding digital. And if you look 2 years ago, we were nowhere in esports in a lot of ways digitally. And even then we were ahead of sports. And I agree with that statement, by the way. And so we're teaching them a lot about digital audiences. You see Adam Silver from the NBA saying, hey, we have a lot to learn from what esports is doing. And now they're doing the partnerships with Twitch. But also alternatively, they monetize their properties far wider, and by wider I mean multiple revenue streams that we're just beginning to tap, whereas we were really confined to just a few revenue streams for a while. And so there's definitely there's the fan growth, there's the regional aspect, there's the training aspect. A lot of those things we can learn from sports teams. Getting to the original question you asked like at the beginning about publisher growth around, I guess, support of the games, I think part of that is just the industry growing and evolving. I think it's easy to forget that esports, though we're like, what, a 20-year-old industry overall, we're only in our maturation stage for just a couple of years, as far as like a true business that can really grow and sustain. 4 years ago, esports was really niche and hobby, and it like exploded. So now we have publishers figuring out their strategy. We have brands figuring out their strategy. We have every sports team and league figuring out their strategy and starting to implement pieces of it. But I think that in the end, if the model proves itself, which it's been doing, obviously, the publishers, the sports owners, the leagues, etc., they're going to have their interest in putting effort out there into making the league profitable for everybody, making sustainable for everybody, because it's in everyone's best interest. Even if I'll tell you, I was talking to a publisher recently who said, hey, we did historically look at it as purely a marketing effort, and we have had a change very recently where we've decided this is going to be a really big focus for us on the esports side. And this is not always the case, but I think that comes from seeing the numbers, seeing it happen, especially for their own game. So
Statchy Stat in chat says that Marty's talked a lot about community. How much of yours or the business's time is taken up by community management?
So yeah, community management's a big thing for us. I think across all esports team, we'd say that everyone does it a little better or a little worse than another. We have a team of 3 community managers. We have someone who just works on fan engagement stuff. We're hiring a marketing director right now, and then we have someone working on a bunch of local engagement things, like we're doing booths at events and engaging with fans. For us, we were so focused early on competitiveness. We wanted to be really, really good, and we got good at that. We won 5 championships and 5 different titles last year. So we were really, really pleased to get that level of competitive success. Then we realized now that we're that solid, we need to get a lot more focus on growing that engagement for fans, both digital and in person. And so things like Discord, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as on-site activations, going to events, those are becoming incredibly important for us. And you can see, like, we're building a studio. We literally have a studio under construction at our headquarters. We hired a non-camera talent full-time just to do content, along with the team of folks that produce that content. And that's because we do see that opportunity of community engagement management as a big opportunity for us.
Yeah. How do you see? I'm curious. I have experience in community management, and I've sort of found community management to be a platform where, for as great as a role it can be to help get your game or your team interacting with fans, you're sometimes you're sometimes beholden to platform. Like essentially like what the rules of the platform are. Like say Facebook's algorithm, is Twitter going to promote, like if you pay Twitter to promote your post, they're going to do it properly. Reddit doesn't really allow you to own the Reddit subreddit, like you have to sort of just be another member of it while an independent group manages it. How have you found, how has your community team found working within these confines, and how it's affected your ability to interact with your fans?
So I would say that number one, we definitely have I guess worked within the rules and accepted they're everyone's rules, and then what's the best we can do within this. So what we do for Facebook is very different from what we do for Twitter. It's very different from what we do for Reddit, right? And that's how it should be. You shouldn't just plaster something across all platforms and go, that's it, and call it a day. We also take the platforms as actually an engagement tool. So what you might see, like, let's say 10 Twitter posts over a day. I'm just picking a round number, but majority of our community management time is not spent doing that. It's answering messages, it's responding to posts, it's seeing what the community vibe is so they can properly react to things. It isn't just post, right? So I think that a big part of what they do is understanding how they can best engage and be a member of that community in a lot of ways rather than just lead. If you take something like Reddit, we think it's important that we are a member voice of the community, not just like we are Splyce and we're here to set the record straight. So we come in and we communicate and things like that. I wouldn't dare speak for our community management folks because they're really smart and really good at what they do. And I'll be honest, I don't have a good idea what they do because that's why I hire great people. My job is to know who the great people are, hire them, and let them excel at what they do by giving them the resources they need. So at least what I've seen as the layman is that a big part of where their success has been is understanding the limitations, working within them, and trying to be as creative as possible within those.
Right on. Just a heads up for everyone, we're planning to end the stream a little early, but like we're getting on 12:30, but we'll give it a few more minutes, I think. So if you have questions for Marty about managing esports teams, any questions similar to that about his GDC talk, feel free to ask them in Twitch chat, and I will grab them and throw them at him and see if he can dodge before we wrap up. I have a few more questions for you, Marty. The first one being, on the last couple weeks, a lot of websites wrote a lot of news stories about how the Overwatch League was signing its first professional female player. The women's participation in esports has been a conversation for several years because it has to do with everything from how tournaments are organized to sort of long-standing sexism in various game communities to arguments about player skill to like all this long, complicated, and sometimes like very personally affecting question, because for some people it's having their skill and their integrity questioned. For other people it's like we're trying to do the best we can, but even we have blind spots. Are you working to try and draft more female players for your team, and what do you see has been the biggest change as that series of events? I don't want to call it a conversation because I've called a lot of things a conversation today, as that series of events has evolved.
Yes, so I mean, for full transparency, I have two daughters, and I also have we have, I think, the only female captain of any professional esports team in our Rocket League captain, Karma. And what's really interesting is Karma and I did a podcast once where I said, hey, look, we're going to talk a little bit about it, but I don't want it to be about the fact that you're a female in this podcast, right? Because that's what it can turn into is, hey, what's it like being a female in esports and da-da-da-da-da. And instead we talked about, hey, what's it like that you're a kick-ass athlete who's now been successful in Hearthstone and Rocket League. She used to play basketball at a high level. Like, she is grown through the competitive ranks to now being a preeminent voice in the Rocket League scene, which is obviously one of the biggest growing games and an awesome community among esports. Now, more, I guess, philosophically for me personally, I won't speak for broadly esports or broadly the Splyce brand. I guess I think that being an old guy for esports, I'm 38 years old, it comes a lot just endemically with human nature, it's not the right word, our culture, in that when we were young, when I was young, these were boy toys and these were girl toys. So as we grew up, more boys played video games than girls, so there's a smaller pool of girls that even played games when they were younger. And so just like if you want to compare it to anything else you're good at, the size of the pool will affect the size of the amount of good players that are there. There are many other factors. There is the harassment, there is the fact of like what people are interested in and choose to go after, because just because you play doesn't mean you're going to be interested in going after it as a career. They're actually absolutely relevant. I know I've talked to a number of females in the scene who agree that they prefer the route with like Rocket League, where the females and the males are the same, unlike Counter-Strike, where they're separated because it feels like they're unable to evolve and become part of the same community, right? Like, I can't see the route for where Counter-Strike female pros become part of a male team because they're not playing against the same level of competition. They're not having the same avenues because they're in these separate competitions. I really think, like, look, esports is that opportunity where anybody can succeed. There's no longer like, well, women on average are shorter, or women on average are smaller, any of those things that affect you playing football or basketball or baseball or whatever. Like, we're all the same when it comes to this stuff. And I hope my daughters, who are 7 and 4 years old, have the same opportunities that I do as a male, right? I do think that part of our shift in culture of now where it's more often where it's okay to buy, and I say okay because I think it's ridiculous we have to have this conversation, a boy a doll and a girl an army truck. Like my kids, I constantly say, like, there is no such thing as a boy or girl toy. There are just toys, you know. And my son loves dressing up as a fairy and a princess, and my daughters love to do traditional boy things like play with cars, you know. I think that's a big part of breaking down those barriers so there are more of each pool. And we see that in gamers in general now, right? Like if you look at young gamers, 6, 7, 8 years old, they're all gamers. There's no like, oh, this many boys, this many girls, like there was when I was a kid. It really is, they're all gamers. So I think it over time will filter its way out organically in a way. I hope. A big part of that is that we can help that through putting up more accepting communities, and we really become better parts of those community as men who don't have to be assholes, basically, right? When a woman hops in a chat or she speaks on a comm, because it takes a lot of times someone courageous to do that because they do have to deal with harassment. So
right. There's 2 questions in chat that I think are super great, and we will get to them, but I want to follow up on that. So you mentioned up front, and I wish we had more time to break down some of the stats about older gaming history, because that's actually a huge conversation that I think people give GDC talks about. But we don't have time for that, so I need to. I have only one follow-up question on that. So do you see? You talk about making sure there's a pool of sort of, I guess, a broad pool of players some of whom will aspire to professionaldom. That's not a word, I just made it up. Do you then are you then saying that there's a little bit of responsibility on the part of game publishers to make sure that their broad communities, even if they aren't competitive, are more gender diverse, and working to make them more inclusive on that aspect?
That's a good question. You know, I mean, like if we look at games where, I mean, Overwatch is probably the most outspoken one right now. Everyone talks about there's such a wide, diverse array of characters. Yeah. Everyone can hop in and go, that's a character that I really want to play and I am interested in. I personally don't play Overwatch because I'm old and it's too fast for me. But I totally get different connections, different types of characters. I really like playing Mei when I played it because I'm a tree hugger and a hippie, and she kind of fits that type of thing. Yeah. So like there are. That's a really interesting, like, very diverse thing versus a game where maybe it's a bunch of dudes, they're typical white soldier males shooting things up, right? I think there's good middle ground. I don't think every game has to be like this perfect dichotomy of everything, because I think coming from theater and storytelling is really important. Right? Yeah. So when you're building a game, the story comes first. No different than it does when you're building a play or a movie or whatever. It is up to the wider game world to have more voices able to make games. And if you have a wider range of people making games, you're going to get a wider array of stories and you're going to get a wider range of characters. So I don't think necessarily you have to have every game have this diverse character set. But if you have a diverse number of games people can get involved in, then that will drive the interest from lots and lots of different groups in general. And I mean, we see that now just because it's so much, I won't use the word easy because it's certainly not easy to make a game, but it's more accessible to make games now with all the tools that are out there, things like the Steam Marketplace making it so that you can actually get your game out there, unlike having to get an actual cartridge made back in the day. And I do think we're much further along. It's hard to say where the onus lies because I honestly am not from the publisher side and I don't know that world very well. Right. I can say as a consumer, that's what I am. And someone who loves great story, if we give opportunity for great storytellers to tell, we'll see more amazing stories. And we start to see that a little more in Hollywood. We start to see a little more in Broadway, where new diverse storytellers. You're seeing things like Hamilton is a good example, right? Like Hamilton would have never existed 20 years ago on Broadway. But now that we have more diverse storytellers, like Hamilton is a freaking brilliant piece of art, and it's only because of more diverse voices telling the stories, not because every single story had a full diverse voice set. If that makes sense.
Right on. I will now migrate to the chat questions. I was going to make a joke about how we are all consumers and we consume things. It's just a strange word. 8421 Huge asks, do you think it will be harder to step up for smaller teams in the future? Since most games, there are established top teams that soak up good players, sponsored prize pools, and don't leave that much for smaller teams.
So I have kind of two answers to that question. I think the idea of soaking up and the pool available is going to grow anyway, because we're going to see more and more big sponsors coming in. I mean, just this year is, what's today? Today's the 21st. Yeah. Okay, we're a month and a half in. And look how many major brands have come in, Gummy Bears and Toyota and Mercedes and like all these big brands. They've all been on the precipice for a while going, we know we need to do something, we're just not sure what, and more of them are making the move. And I think that's showing a bit of the fact that the pool will grow and there'll be more opportunity. But the other answer is I think that some of it will be a bit like there will be different communities. And yes, there is a divide between what we'll say maybe is the tier 1 organizations who play in the very, very top leagues, the very, very top games, and maybe the tier 2 or tier 3 who are playing in the middle communities or the smaller communities. And it'll be a vital part of what happens, I guess, as an ecosystem. But I don't think there's any reason no different than you can't have the Rochester Red Wings, which are a minor league baseball team and are by no means competing with the New York Yankees, but are a business themselves that provides a vital service to the community. Rochester only has so many sports teams here. So I think there's room for everybody. It's going to settle out in some way. And I think, are you going to build a business like the Yankees that way? Probably not. It's probably unlikely at this point, but it doesn't mean you can't build a viable business. So
right on. StatUstat chimes in again with their impression of esports is that perhaps due to a high pressure environment, they can be players. Excuse me. Their impression of esports players is that perhaps due to a high pressure environment, they can be quite difficult to work with. How do you work with difficult players?
So first of all, I've worked with talent is talent. So I've worked with talent for 15 years, actors, singers, dancers, esports players, they're all talent, right? And you'll have a varying range of talent. You have those ones who are very humble and amazing to work with, and you do have ones that are stubborn and difficult and everywhere in between. And you also have ones that vary depending on how high pressure, you mentioned that can affect things. I think number one is the relationship we build pre-high pressure situations. When we had the event in Dallas for CWL where there were 2 different bomb threats called it, and the entire event got squished, and we were playing back to back to back to try and get this event done, and our guys were exhausted and they were stressed, and it was a tough event. Being able to understand where their mindsets were, being able to support them and converse in the right way was something I developed because I known these guys for a long time at that point. So I knew when to back off, when to talk to them, what activities to not do. We're not going to do that sponsor activation or whatever. We'll save it for the next event. And understanding they're human beings at the end of the day. I'd say the second thing is we have built a really good level of respect between them in delivering what's asked for, making changes based on some of the things they ask sometimes, not all the time, but being able to like, hey, that's an interesting idea you have. Maybe we can shift the way we work with players based on that feedback, rather than these are the rules, we are Splyce, you must do. And now someone can clip that, by the way, and say that that's what I said out of context, right? So, but I really I mean it. I think that I personally love working with players. I think that they're fantastic. I love working with someone who's so great at something. And I think if you learn to have respect for them, they'll have respect for you.
Right on. Artful TV would like to know what's your advice for a 17-year-old whose goal is to work as an esports executive? What internships should they aim for, and what kind of networking opportunities should they seek out? FYI, they are headed to college as a business major next year.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I get asked it a lot in general about what do I do to get into esports. The first thing I can say is good you're saying, hey, I'm going to get some training in something specific like business management. All these people go, I like to call people I heart esports people, meaning that they have no specific thing they want to do in esports. They just want to work in it. And by the way, it happens in film, television, theater, traditional sports. Every entertainment industry has this exact same problem, which is people who are like, oh my God, I want to do that because it seems so amazing, but they don't bring something to the table. And I will tell you, some of the people I noticed, Melvin's in the chat, for example, Melvin is our travel agent. Okay. Hi, Melvin. Melvin brought a skill set that we needed, which is a travel agent. And we said, great, we need that. And Melvin has been Splyce's travel agent for, 6-8 months now, something like that. And that's because he brought a specific skill to the table. We see that with finance people. The person I always love to point to is Bryce Blum from ESG. Bryce is a lawyer. So Bryce brought a very specific skill to the table. He's also incredibly knowledgeable in esports and well connected because he built that over time. You can't find many people like Bryce who are really good at one thing and really knowledgeable and well connected in the industry. Usually you have to pick one or the other. So, for example, we've hired some people who are completely outside the industry but absolute experts at what they do, and we've done the opposite. Completely connected in the industry, but we've got to teach them a bit as they go. I think the biggest thing you can do is, number one, get some education on something you really want to do: finance, legal, management, whatever it is, accounting. I don't know, whatever it is that you find interesting. Get really good at that so you can bring a skill, not just I'm from esports. Number two is try a bunch of different stuff. There's so many small organizations out there that need volunteers, and even big ones sometimes, like DreamHack and MLG will ask for volunteers at their events, where you should just get in and try and see what happens. But then also go to events that have the opportunity to meet people, and don't be pushy, but get your opportunity to talk to people. I've had in the past where people like shove their way in and they're like, I'm interested in esports. Can you help me, Laser Chicken? And I'm like, that's very like I every minute of my day is very valuable. I have 70 people whose livelihood relies on me, and so I have to pick and choose where I do that. But if you can find ways where you can organically bring yourself into the conversation and really grow relationships with people, it's much easier to ask for help later on down the road. So if you can find those areas to network, and by the way, they happen online too, getting involved in conversations and joining the conversation, but also offline things that happen in your neighborhood or going to events, that's going to help. But the biggest thing you can do is get a skill set and practice it by just joining small organizations in volunteer roles.
Right on. As Pet, we actually discussed Splyce's relationship with game developers and publishers earlier in the hour. So I'm going to... I see your question. That's a great question. But just because we've already covered it, I'm going to...
You can watch the VOD.
Watch the VOD. Yeah, it'll be on Gamasutra.com. We're going to start wrapping things up, but if you know, like if I see a question in chat, I'll grab it. But I'm just going to... Marty, have you found out what time and where your talk is yet at GDC?
Yes, I do know. So my talk is on...
I might be getting in trouble because I'm not sure these are online yet, but screw it, let's tell them.
It's on the Monday, which is called Esports Day, the 19th of March. It's at 5:30 Pacific. I have an entire hour for me and Todd to speak. Todd is also speaking with me, like I mentioned, the Chief Marketing Officer, Delaware North. If you have Dota questions, you'll point them at him. If you have any other questions, you'll point them at me, because I won't pretend I know anything about Dota whatsoever. But I am a big fan of many, many other titles, and one day maybe I'll watch Dota. And it'll be a lot of fun. I'm hoping people not only will ask questions there in the audience, but also online in Twitch chat, because I'm a big fan of questions. So
yeah, I don't actually know. Talks don't tend to be streamed out of GDC. Unfortunately.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, but they do go up on the GDC Vault later, so you'll have a chance to share.
Well, my Twitter. I mean, like I always tell people, hit me up on Twitter. I like having conversations. I do AMAs on Reddit pretty much every month. So.
Yeah. Right on. Before we go, I will say Moses FPS Live wants to say thank you for supporting Halo, dude, and good luck at HWC.
Oh, Moses. Yeah, man. What's up, dude?
Yeah. And 8241 Hugigan is back in the chat with as a spy and League fanboy. Do you think the playoffs will be yours?
Look, League of Legends is probably it is my favorite game to follow. It's what I got into esports. Warcraft and League were my two games. I will say that it is the most competitive it's maybe ever been since we've been in, which is awesome to watch and terrifying as an owner, because I don't even know who the top six are going to be at this point. I would say it can be argued that nobody can pick the top six at this point, which is awesome, by the way, to watch.
Yeah.
I really do think we have the talent. We've always said it's about progressing over time. We're doing that. We had an absolutely dominant victory over Giants, so we've shown we're capable of it. Kabe is putting on like a top 5 performance, like he looks like MVP candidate. But now it's how can we pull it all together for the end of the season? And really, the goal is not just end the season, but Worlds. So we have some time. So
I think your GDC co-speaker just jumped into chat because they said they're still waiting on that Dota roster.
Don't worry, Todd. I actually prefaced this talk with the fact that you would at some point ask when we're getting a Dota roster. So
right on. Todd, thanks you for dropping by. Thank you all for dropping by. Before we go, I'm just going to point out that GDC and Gamasutra are sibling organizations under UBM Americas. So when we are here talking about GDC, as much as we're just generally hyped for game developers and games business people to learn more things about the industry, we are obligated to point out that we have that business relationship. Otherwise, it'll be really shady if we don't point that out. I always make that go on too long. Marty, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really great to talk about this part of the video game business.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm excited for the talk because I was part of a panel last year at GDC, and I was amazed at how receptive the audience was and how many questions they had and how many good new relationships I built. So one of my goals is to help developers, tackle this industry in the right way because it helps us all, right? So I'm glad to do it.
And if you are curious for more information on Marty's talk, just scroll down and click the square button that says "See Marty's talk" at GDC. And hopefully we will see some of you who are in Twitch chat at the show. If not, the talk will definitely be on the GDC Vault after. I just can't guarantee if it's going to be a free talk or behind our paywall for a couple years. With that, Marty, thanks so much. And to everyone at home, have a nice day. Bye.
Thanks.